I still remember the morning of my wedding like it was yesterday. The air smelled like rain and roses, and everyone kept saying I looked like I was glowing. I wasn't glowing, I was trembling from the inside, holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, my life was finally about to feel complete. I had waited years for that day, dreamed of the aisle, the vows, the promise that someone would finally choose me forever. And beside me through it all was my sister. My best friend, my mirror, my constant. At least, that's what I thought she was. She was the one who helped me pick the dress, who made me laugh when I panicked about the seating plan, who held my hand and whispered, "You deserve this happiness." Those words used to make me cry, now they burn. Because she didn't mean them. She knew exactly what she was doing. While I was falling deeper into the dream, she was quietly tearing the ground out from under me. The night before the wedding, she came to my room, wine glass in hand, eyes shining with something I couldn't read then but I understand too well now. She hugged me tight and said, "Don't ever let anyone break your heart." If I had known what was coming, I would have asked her why she was warning me. The morning of the wedding felt like magic, for the first few hours. The house was full of laughter, makeup artists running around, the smell of perfume, soft music, my mother crying happy tears. Everyone kept saying how perfect we looked, how beautiful the day felt. I believed them. I believed every single word. Until I didn't. It started small. Whispers. People glancing at me and then away. My maid of honor, my sister, missing for too long. My fiancé not answering his phone. My stomach turned but I kept smiling, thinking maybe it was just nerves. Maybe he was late. Maybe she was helping him with something. Maybe everything was fine. Then my cousin came in, pale as paper, she wouldn't look at me. She just held out her phone, shaking. And there it was, a message thread. Dozens of them. Photos. Texts. My sister. My fiancé. Messages that left no room for confusion. They weren't new. They'd been happening for months. Maybe even longer. The sound that came out of me wasn't a scream, it was something quieter, something that didn't even sound human. Like the world went silent, and all I could hear was the cracking of my own heartbeat. The veil on my head suddenly felt like a joke. The white dress, the flowers, the promises, everything was a lie built on their secret. And everyone knew before I did. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at that screen, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I remember whispering, "No, she wouldn't." Because sisters don't do that. Sisters protect you. They don't steal your happiness, your trust, your future. Someone came in and tried to tell me not to make a scene. But it was already a scene, my life had turned into one. Guests started whispering louder, the music faded. And in that chaos, my sister walked in. Still in her maid of honor dress, smiling faintly like she didn't know the world had just fallen apart. But she saw my face, and her smile cracked. For a second, we just stared at each other. I asked her one question, "How could you?" She didn't answer. Just tears, useless, empty tears. And behind her, he appeared. My almost husband. The man who promised me forever. I didn't stay long enough to hear their excuses. I walked out, in my wedding dress, in the middle of the aisle, while everyone watched. People gasped, phones came out, someone called my name, but I kept walking. I didn't even take my shoes. The ground was wet and cold beneath my feet, and I didn't care. I just wanted out. Out of that hall, out of that lie, out of the story I thought was mine. That night, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by flowers that now smelled rotten to me. My phone kept buzzing, friends, family, my mother, her, I didn't answer any of them. I turned everything off and sat there, staring at the wall until sunrise. And then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. But because it finally hit me, they took everything from me. And I had nothing left to lose. That's when the idea of revenge was born. Not loud, not angry, quiet, patient, like a seed. Something I could grow slowly, carefully. Because if they could lie for months, I could wait a little while to tell the truth. For the next few weeks, I disappeared. No calls, no posts, no explanations. I let them think I was broken. That I'd vanished, humiliated, defeated. And while they relaxed, while the world moved on, I started collecting pieces. Screenshots. Dates. Messages they forgot to delete. Friends who finally started whispering the things they had kept hidden. It was all there, waiting, a story they thought would never see daylight. But I didn't want chaos. I wanted precision. If I was going to expose them, I'd do it in a way they'd never forget. Not by screaming, not by begging for sympathy, but by letting the truth speak louder than I ever could. I waited until they forgot they had locked their own secrets in plain sight. I learned how people let their guard down, in anger, in comfort, in late-night laziness, and I used that quiet time to collect the truth. I found messages they thought were deleted, screenshots hidden in backups, locations tagged in photos that matched hotel receipts. I found small gifts he'd slipped into her bag, notes that read like love letters but were written in the wrong handwriting. I traced their timeline, dinners, nights out, the way their words softened at the edges in ways they pretended weren't real. Everything lined up, like a map someone had left for me without realizing. I didn't want to humiliate them for sport. I wanted them to face what they did in a place where excuses wouldn't stick. So I planned. Not for a dramatic public shaming, but for a controlled truth, a night where the facts would be laid out plainly. And in that chaos, my sister walked in. Still in her maid-of-honor dress, smiling faintly like she didn't know the world had just fallen apart. But she saw my face, and her smile cracked. For a second, we just stared at each other. I asked her one question, how could you? She didn't answer. Just tears, useless, empty tears. And behind her, he appeared. My almost husband. The man who promised me forever. I didn't stay long enough to hear their excuses. I walked out, in my wedding dress, in the middle of the aisle, while everyone watched. People gasped, phones came out, someone called my name, but I kept walking. I didn't even take my shoes. The ground was wet and cold beneath my feet, and I didn't care. I just wanted out. Out of that hall, out of that lie, out of the story I thought was mine. That night, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by flowers that now smelled rotten to me. My phone kept buzzing, friends, family, my mother, her, I didn't answer any of them. I turned everything off and sat there, staring at the wall until sunrise. And then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. But because it finally hit me, they took everything from me. And I had nothing left to lose. That's when the idea of revenge was born. Not loud, not angry, quiet, patient, like a seed. Something I could grow slowly, carefully. Because if they could lie for months, I could wait a little while to tell the truth. For the next few weeks, I disappeared. No calls, no posts, no explanations. I let them think I was broken. That I'd vanished, humiliated, defeated. And while they relaxed, while the world moved on, I started collecting pieces. Screenshots. Dates. Messages they forgot to delete. Friends who finally started whispering the things they had kept hidden. It was all there, waiting, a story they thought would never see daylight. But I didn't want chaos. I wanted precision. If I was going to expose them, I'd do it in a way they'd never forget. Not by screaming, not by begging for sympathy, but by letting the truth speak louder than I ever could. I waited until they forgot they had locked their own secrets in plain sight. I learned how people let their guard down, in anger, in comfort, in late-night laziness, and I used that quiet time to collect the truth. I found messages they thought were deleted, screenshots hidden in backups, locations tagged in photos that matched hotel receipts. I found small gifts he'd slipped into her bag, notes that read like love letters but were written in the wrong handwriting. I traced their timeline, dinners, nights out, the way their words softened at the edges in ways they pretended weren't real. Everything lined up, like a map someone had left for me without realizing. I didn't want to humiliate them for sport. I wanted them to face what they did in a place where excuses wouldn't stick. So I planned. Not for a dramatic public shaming, but for a controlled truth, a night where the facts would be laid out plainly. In front of the people who mattered to us both. I printed conversations in order, arranged photos by date, highlighted timestamps that couldn't be argued with. I rehearsed how to speak calmly because I knew rage would give them space to twist things. Calm made the facts louder. The night I decided to act, I invited a handful of people to my parents' house for dinner. It felt cunning and delicate and a little cruel, but I wanted witnesses who knew us, who had once seen us as sisters and thought we were invincible. My parents came because they loved both of us. A few close friends came because I told them I needed support. Emily sat quietly in the corner, her face pale but steady. I pushed the printed pages across the table like a deck of cards. I didn't cry. I read slowly, letting each sentence land. Names. Dates. Locations. Photos of stolen moments. Notes she had written about finally feeling seen. The room shrank until the only sound was the paper scratching under my fingers. I watched them look for the words that would make the story kinder. Daniel's face went white like someone who'd remembered he'd been asleep at the wheel of his life. Lena's eyes darted, like a bird searching for an escape route. My father's hand trembled. My mother nearly dropped her cutlery. People tried to reason, it must be complicated, someone murmured, but when details line up, complicated becomes a thin fabric over a void. I wasn't there to break them, I wanted them to meet the truth and find it undeniable. After that night, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Some friends stepped away, unsure how to reconcile the sister they loved with the betrayal they now believed. Others held me like I was made of glass and needed careful carrying. Lena and Daniel tried to patch the hole with explanations, with the tired line of "we didn't mean for it to happen," but people aren't fools for long when evidence speaks. The community around us rearranged itself. Invitations that once came easily stopped. Opportunities cooled. Work people murmured. Their reputations, once taken for granted, frayed like rope left in sun and rain. I did not gloat. I did not post the evidence for strangers. Instead, I told the people who had been invited to my wedding the truth in a direct message. I wrote a simple statement about what had happened, about why I walked away, and asked them to respect my privacy. The truth has a way of traveling, and it did, but doing it quietly kept it from becoming a circus. Over time, the ripples I'd started settled into consequences that matched the harm done. They felt the loss of the life they'd chosen. Loneliness settled into their days in a way that was quieter and more precise than any viral post could have made it. There were moments of unexpected mercy in the aftermath. My mother, who had wanted to believe in both her daughters, hurt in ways I could hardly describe. One afternoon she sat me down in the kitchen, hands clasped like someone praying, and said, "I am so sorry you had to carry that alone for so long." Her apology was messy and human. It didn't fix everything, but it was a salve. My father, usually quiet and pragmatic, made small gestures. He fixed a chair I liked, he called with recipes and old stories, as if rebuilding family life one ordinary thing at a time. As they unraveled, I rebuilt. I learned that healing is not a thunderclap, it's a sequence of tiny resurrections. The first time I slept through the night without waking in a panic, I felt like I'd been given a small miracle. The first morning I made coffee and didn't check my phone for messages from people who would never send what I needed, I laughed at my own relief. I started keeping a notebook again, the kind with soft pages that accept secrets without judgment. I wrote about the good small things, a friend who brought soup, a walk in the park where the air smelled like fresh-cut grass, a stranger's smile. Slowly, I let other people in. Not to replace what had been lost but to expand the small, careful life I was building. I reconnected with friends who had watched me and waited for permission to be close again. I joined a writing group, where people shared their scattered fragments of dignity and we sewed them back together with sentences and cups of tea. Speaking in that room felt like pulling a breathing apparatus over my chest, with each confession, the air came easier. I discovered that telling the truth about what happened to me did not make me weak, it made me whole again in a way I hadn't expected. Months later, the most surprising thing happened. Lena reached out. Not with anger or bluster, but with the small, tremulous message of someone who'd been awake a long time, haunted by choices. "Can we talk?" she asked. My first instinct was to slam the phone shut and bury the past beneath the noise of distraction. But I was older now, older and less interested in feeding my sorrow. Curiosity and the need for closure outweighed everything else. I agreed. We met at a small cafe where the chairs were mismatched and the coffee was too strong. She sat across from me looking thin and tired, the kind of tired that comes from having to explain your life to yourself. For a long time, neither of us knew what to say. Then she started, not with excuses but with confession. "I was jealous," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to be happy for you, and when I had the chance to feel chosen, her voice broke. I lost myself." She told me about nights she couldn't sleep, about the way friends had peeled away, about the looks that followed her in the street. She wasn't fishing for forgiveness. She wanted me to hear the truth that had finally crippled her. Hearing her speak did something to me I hadn't allowed before. I had drawn a picture of her as the villain and held it like a shield. But listening, really listening, I saw a human being ragged by regret. It didn't erase what she did, but it humanized it. I told her what hurt the most, the dismantling of trust, the way she took from me more than a man could ever take. She cried until there was nothing left to give of that kind of remorse. I told her I didn't know if I could fully forgive her, not in the way that makes everything okay, but I could stop letting the wound define me. We left that conversation with no fairy tale reconciliation. There were no promises of a returned sisterhood, only a fragile, honest truce. She said, "Thank you," and I understood. For the first time, she had felt the full weight of what she'd taken. That's a strange kind of justice. It doesn't feed on spectacle. It is quiet and relentless. It's the everyday consequence of fewer invitations, harder mornings, the slow loss of the unexamined life. In the months that followed, I started to say yes to things I had once avoided. I traveled to places with no plan and sat in small cafes, watching people who were not part of my story. I dated again, cautiously, with the kind of careful optimism I'd learned to practice. The man I began to love later did not come with fireworks or grand declarations. He arrived like a low light, reliable, calm, patient. He asked about my day and listened. He didn't try to fix old wounds so much as hold the space where healing could happen. It felt new, not because it was perfect, but because it was consistent. I learned that love after betrayal is less loud and more deliberate. It teaches you that safety can be ordinary. There were nights when the past would lap at the edges of my peace like persistent tide. I would find myself standing in front of a store window, staring at wedding dresses with a small, strange ache. Sometimes the grief would come back sharp and hot, like a window that had been cracked open. But the difference now was that I could close the window when I needed to. I had control over when I let the past in. I could think of that day at the altar and feel the sting, but also see the person I'd become because of it. The narrative had shifted, from victim to survivor, from someone defined by heartbreak to someone reclaiming authorship of her own life. People asked me, sometimes with pity and other times with admiration, how I'd managed. I told them the truth. It wasn't a single heroic act, it was a series of tiny choices. The choice to gather facts instead of losing myself in fantasies about what could have been. The choice to confront rather than implode. The choice to forgive in private, so that anger wouldn't keep my wounds fresh. Each day I made small promises to myself and kept them: go for a walk, call a friend, write one page. The accumulation of those pages became a new map. The moral I speak of now isn't pretty and it isn't simple. Don't wait for justice from the outside, build it where you can. Protect your peace. Gather evidence not to punish but to protect yourself from deception. Hold your dignity. And when the time comes to show the truth, do it for clarity, not revenge. I learned that revenge if aimed only at hurting someone will only hollow you out. But making the truth known, calmly and clearly, reclaimed a part of me that had been stolen. There was a night, months later, when I drove to the beach alone. I had a letter in my pocket, the unsent letter to Lena I had written in the worst of my nights, full of anger, sorrow, and questions. I read it once, aloud to the night, and then let the wind take it. The words scattered like loose pages. It felt like an act of releasing something heavy I had carried too long. I whispered a thank you to the ocean for taking what I needed to let go and walked home lighter. Now when people ask about that chapter of my life, I tell them the short version and then the part that matters most, what followed. The mornings I lived for, the friendships that proved to be true, the work I poured myself into, the slow building of a life that did not require anyone else's permission to be beautiful. My sister and I are still in the places sisters find themselves sometimes, near enough to speak in careful sentences, far enough to heal without watching each other. We have no portrait of perfect reconciliation, and I don't pretend there's a happy ending like the movies show. What we have is reality, two people who hurt and grew from it, and the knowledge that our choices now are what matter. If I could speak to the woman I was in that white dress, I would say, it's not the end. You will find yourself again. You will learn to trust your voice. You will learn that forgiveness is not always a gift to those who hurt you but a liberation for yourself. Remember that your value was never contingent on someone else's promise. Remember that the quiet dignity of truth will outlive any false image built to cover it. I tell this story not to exact more pain on anyone, but because I know how loud betrayal can feel when it's new and how small and private triumph is when it finally arrives. If you are listening and you carry that weight, know that you are allowed to rebuild slowly. You are allowed to set boundaries that protect your peace. You are allowed to forgive on your terms. And most importantly, you are allowed to choose yourself first. My life did not end on that cold, wet aisle. It began again in the small, absurd ways, a returned call, a book read in a sunlit room, a laugh that surprised me. I learned to find joy that was not borrowed from someone else's approval. I learned that true strength grows in the quiet, patient places where we stitch ourselves back together. And when the night comes and memories knock at your door, answer with the truth that you survived them and now you are building a life worth living, on your terms, with your dignity intact.